Okay, calm down.
Very excited to be bringing on our next guest, who is making his debut on the Katie Halper Show. Jeffrey Sterling is a former CIA case officer turned whistleblower who was wrongfully convicted on no evidence of violating the Espionage Act, for which he was sentenced to federal prison. His memoir, Unwanted Spy, chronicles his experience with race, not only within the CIA, but also in America. He is currently part of the progressive RootsAction team. So welcome, Jeffrey.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Of course. Thank you for coming. So we wanted to talk to you about Julian Assange, of course, someone else who has been convicted under the Espionage Act. But first, can you share with people your story?
Okay. Yeah, I was a CIA case officer. I specialized in Iranian targets. And along the way, I ran into racism at the CIA. I sued the CIA for racial discrimination. My case was not allowed to go forward because of the courts agreed, and the then administration argued that for me as a Black man to fight for my civil rights would be a threat to national security. But during my time also there, I was involved in a faulty, dangerous operation targeting the Iranian nuclear program. I blew the whistle on that program to the intelligence committees, the House and the Senate intelligence committees. Shortly after I made my concerns known about this operation and the danger that it could pose to our troops, who at the time were going into Iraq, information related to that operation, was leaked to a journalist. I was accused of being that leaker. I was charged with violating the Espionage Act. I was put on trial and found guilty on absolutely no evidence. I spent 2.5 years in prison.
So yet another case of the only people who get in trouble for something that bad that the CIA does are the people who expose what happened. Although in this case, you didn't even expose the thing that they accused you of exposing.
Absolutely. And a funny thing during the trial, and it was nothing more than a show trial, there was testimony from one of the individuals on one of the intelligence committees who admitted, and it was entered into, factually, that she had lost her job, was fired from one of those committees for leaking information to a journalist. And it just so happens the journalist she leaked that information to was the same one they accused me of leaking information to. Yet that didn't matter to the court, the jury, prosecutors, certainly not the Obama administration at that time who orchestrated the charges against me. But that just shows how much of a show trial it was, how much of a farce, bringing charges related to the Espionage Act against particularly whistleblowers. And it was a horrendous ordeal. And at some point, I'm going to still be able to laugh about it. So.
And what was the thing that you did expose? Can you tell us about that?
Well, the operation, it was called Operation Merlin. The design was to put plans for a nuclear weapon into the Iranian program. Those plans would come from an intermediary, former Russian scientist who, looking for some way to make money, and he just happens to have some plans based on his work in Russia. And we would rig the plans so that they wouldn't work if they were used, but in such a way that the Iranians wouldn't detect the flaw in the plans. Well, as we were going along, it became clear to me that there really was no flaw. The plans were so obvious. The plans were so indicative of something that could be fixed, that instead of thwarting the Iranian efforts to gain a nuclear weapon, we would actually be helping them. We'd be increasing their ability to get and develop nuclear weapons. I let my management know my concerns because I had been given, this is an operation that had been going on years prior to my involvement. And my involvement was to target Iranians, to train the intermediary in how to approach Iranians. But when it came clear to me that all the assurances that I was given about the safety measures in place for this operation, that they were all false, I raised my concerns, and the response was basically shut up. I was then quickly shuffled off of the operation. The discrimination I faced at the agency increased, um, and I was shortly thereafter fired.
And what was this discrimination like that you experienced?
Well, I had been there for years as a case officer, field agent, and I wasn't receiving the same opportunities as everyone else. I wasn't even receiving the same tools as other officers in the same position as myself. And I would say, why am I not receiving the same cover as everyone else? Cover is very important if you're working overseas. I mean, if I go and say I work for the CIA, I'm not going to find many doors open to me. But if I have an appropriate cover that no one would suspect that I was with the CIA, then I could operate efficiently.
Right.
The kind of cover I was given was I was essentially a logistics officer. I was essentially a janitor. Yet, despite the hindrances from my own organization about how I was able to do my job, I was successful as a case officer with the Central Intelligence Agency. But I was asking as the years are passing by, it's like, why am I not receiving the proper tools? Why am I not receiving the same opportunities? And the agency being what it is, my management told me to my face, well, you kind of stick out as a big black guy speaking Farsi.
Wow.
And, I was taken aback by that. I mean, what they were saying was, I could not be secure because I was black, it's tall, and I speak Farsi. Of course, the agency, that's where I learned uh,
Right.
Persian language. And that didn't make any sense because prior to that, I had been successful in my job. Yet to them, it wasn't, none of that mattered. All that mattered to them and all that they saw was the color of my skin. And my response when they said that to me, and they said it in with just such incredulity that and such an arrogance that they knew they were right. I was taken aback, and I said, "Well, when did you realize I was black?"
Right.
As if that mattered. And to them, they just kind of laughed it off. It's like, well, that's our decision, sort of thing. So that shows the arrogance because I had traveled the world as a CIA officer undercover and had never been anywhere in the world. No one ever suspected me of working for the CIA. I did not fit the profile of someone who's with the CIA. Yet to the agency, that that resource that I
Right.
brought to the organization and that I brought to the assistance of our national defense was a hindrance.
Hmm.
It didn't matter to them. So, I mean, that's the kind of discrimination I received there. I tried to fight through that. I tried to, you're in a job. It's like, well, I'm going to prove to you that
Right.
I'm much more than what you want to see. Even with my successes, and when I was my last posting in New York, it got ridiculous, especially after I was raising my concerns about that faulty operation. Then I was required to do 10 times more than officers who had the proper tools, who had the proper support. Um, and I said, okay, that's it. I've had enough. And I
Wow.
started you have to do the internal EEO process. And that, of course, was in the agency's favor. And then I sued in federal court.
And what happened then? That was also unsuccessful.
Yes, it was.
Right. That was
Well,
the one.
in a sense, I sued in I filed suit in New York, in the Southern District of New York. Um, the government, the Department of Justice, argued that you know, for me, because I worked at the CIA and classified information,
Right.
because I worked there, it would pose a threat to
Right.
national security if this trial goes forward, if my action were to go forward. The court of New York said, no, he has a bona fide case, a prima facie case of employment discrimination. This case should go forward. But the government was able to venue shop and had the
Mm.
case moved to the Eastern District of Virginia, the Fourth Circuit, which is notoriously pro CIA, pro government. And immediately that court sided with the government that my case could not go forward because of a threat to national security. It was interesting, their language from that court. They said that they knew that this was a tremendous burden that I was having to bear, but that the interest of national security outweighs any of my civil rights, aspirations. And that I'm still taken aback. It still really hits me to this day that a black man fighting for his civil rights is considered a threat to national security in this country.
I mean, I don't know a lot about the CIA, but it doesn't seem like to prove a case of discrimination doesn't seem like it would require sharing any secrets.
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, we could just talk. There would be no need to get into sources and methods, and that's
Right.
their argument. Say, well, we would have to reveal sources and methods. Well, not really. What is in the national interest of national security interest to discuss the racism that you are perpetuating? The fact that you told this man that he was too big and black to receive the
Right.
same treatment. I mean, what in that sense is a threat to national security? Um, but the interesting thing is, okay, so they were able to have my case stopped, not because of the merits of the case, but because of national security. When I was charged with violating the Espionage Act and went to trial for that, sources and methods were on par or were on stage for all to see.
Right.
I would not have gone, in my case for my discrimination case, wouldn't have gone into the deep of sources and methods of intelligence operations. Yet during this trial, where they are accusing me of leaking classified information, they were giving up much more than I ever
Right.
would have freely in a public forum. So the government is able to make an argument of national to stop an action against it when the government is the defendant, to say, well, national security, we can't go forward with that. Yet when the government is the plaintiff in the exact same situation, decry national security in order to bring charges, Espionage Act charges, to persecute, to have their vengeance against me. And this was clearly retaliation for me having the gall to stand up to the CIA and their discrimination.
And so what has your life been like since? I mean, both prison, but also since prison.
Um, it's been a hellacious ordeal. For me, the actual times when it started, from when I filed my discrimination suit, we're talking about 2001. And I was released from prison in 2018. So it's been an ordeal. And being back since being from prison, life has been difficult. I mean, not only did I have the badge of being convicted of violating the Espionage Act, but also served time in prison. So our society can talk about forgiveness and things like that, but really, you're a pariah, and I have experienced that, especially when it comes to finding work.
Right.
Check that box that you've been convicted, or even if they say incarcerated, pretty much all bets are off. But I have been fortunate enough to find support. There is a contingent of support that I've been able to rely on to just keep going forward, keep my head held high. Great thing for me was being able to publish my book. That was quite cathartic for me. That was a win for me. So, today I'm able to, I lost a lot. I mean, I actually went through 2 rounds of losing everything. After my discrimination action, I was fired. I was pretty much blackballed in the intelligence community. And what was really awful about that was during, again, when we were going into Iraq. 9/11. 9/11 happened, and I offered. At that time, I was on administrative leave. And they were trying to figure out, I guess, what the better way to fire me was going to be. 9/11 happened. I offered to drop my discrimination suit to come back and help. I mean, I spoke Farsi. I had experience dealing with terrorists, targeting terrorists and terrorist operations. The answer to that was, "You're fired." So, I going through all that, but I feel like what, I've survived,
Hmm.
and I continue to believe and hope and know that I continue to thrive. So it's been a hell of an ordeal. Would I have done anything differently? Absolutely not. I can still look myself in the mirror and be okay with who I see.